Um, I thought that I would start by just talking a little bit about why I got interested in the project and in writing about 1926. What probably the most common question I've gotten is why 1926. So for me, the process of writing and researching 1926 started in 1932 because I wrote a book called The Called Shot. And in that, of course, the featured players were Babe Ruth and Rogers Hornsby, Hornsby managing the Cubs up until August when he got fired during a pennant race. So I didn't quite get in 1932 all the way to Hornsby and Ruth having their careers collide actually in a World Series. But as I was doing the research for 1932, I um, I became really interested in the 1926 World Series where Hornsby and Ruth really did collide, literally on the last play of the 7-game series. So that's what got me started, and I was really interested not just in their the Hornsby Ruth kind of battle in the World Series, but everything that led up to it, because the 1926 season kind of begins in 1925, which is this year that the Cardinals are ascending and the Yankees are, you know, have kind of disappeared after the 4 or 5 really good years with Babe Ruth. In 1925, the Yankees finished seventh, 28 and a half games out of first place. The only team that was worse in the American League, the Boston Red Sox. So at the end of 1925, you had the Yankees pretty, at the bottom of the American League, basically. Ruth had his worst season in 1925. He hit 290 and missed a whole lot of games. Illness, he fell and hit his head, knocked himself out on the train coming back from spring training. He clashed with manager Huggins. Um, Sports writers wrote Ruth off. Thought 1925 was probably the end of his career, or very near to the end of his career. So you look at the statistics, just of Hornsby and Ruth in that particular year, 1925. Ruth hit 290, 25 home runs, 66 RBIs. Hornsby hit 403, 39 home runs, 143 RBIs. I mean, their careers are going in completely different directions. And for Hornsby, he had become the manager of the Cardinals in 1925. He took over for Branch Rickey about a third of the way into the season. The Cardinals had started 13 wins and 25 losses under Branch Rickey, and then Hornsby was at age 29 was made the new manager. Um, and he led them to a third or fourth place finish. So going into 1926, nobody thought the Yankees had any chance to do anything. The Cardinals were expected to be in the midst of a pennant race. Um, so that's the way 1926 kind of started for those two players. And if you look back at the spring training for the Cardinals in 1926 was a Hornsby was, I would say, as a manager, he was very difficult for many players to get along with, but he was also very competitive and very inspiring. And early in spring training, he gathered the whole team and um, gave a little speech and said, anybody who thinks we're not going to win the pennant needs to go pick up their paycheck and leave right now. So I think he installed in them a sense that they could be a very good team, although he knew that there were some holes in the roster. He had he had four pretty good players who had come up through Branch Rickey's farm system. Two of the outfielders, Ray Blades and Heine Mueller, had come from the farm system, and then the first and third baseman, Jim Bottomley and Les Bell, had also um, come through the farm system. And they had a good pitching staff. Hornsby had Jesse Haynes, who actually is the second leading winning pitcher in the history of the Cardinals, next to Bob Gibson, and Willie Sherdell, left-handed pitcher, who people said he had two pitches. He had a slow ball and a slower ball. Um, and although he was not a power pitcher, he was someone who managed to win a lot of games for the Cardinals. He was a very good pitcher with men on base. The Cardinals also had Vic Keane. He had been acquired by a trade, and Flint Rem. So Hornsby had four pretty good starting pitchers. He thought he needed one more good starting pitcher, and he was a little disappointed that of his three outfielders, none of them was a real power hitter. So the season began, and Hornsby was able to keep the team kind of in the middle of the pennant race, and then things changed for the Cardinals in the middle of June. Hornsby, first of all, was able to trade Heine Mueller to the Giants for Billy Southworth. And Southworth then really became the hitting star for the second half of the season. Key hits all the way through the pennant race in August and September. And the other acquisition, which is more notable in many ways, is that he got Grover Cleveland Alexander from the Cubs. Alexander, at this point in his career, was 39 years old. He'd won over 330 games at this point. He'd had, a terrific start to his career with the Phillies. He'd won 30 games, 3 years in a row. And after he won the 30 games in 1917, the Phillies knew that he was going to get drafted, so they got rid of him. They traded him to the Cubs, and he had a productive 8 or 9 years with the Cubs until Joe McCarthy decided in 1926 that he was really trying to rebuild the Cubs at that point, and he didn't need a pitcher, Alexander, who he thought was, well, to put it mildly, he didn't take care of his body. He was an alcoholic. He was an epileptic. Um, He'd managed still to win 330 games, but he was 39 years old. The one person who really had a great deal of faith in Alexander was Hornsby. And Hornsby, of course, being in the National League, had played against and batted against Alexander over most of his career. So those two acquisitions really solidified the Cardinals' lineup in 1926. The Yankees, on the other hand, got off to a rousing start. They basically led the American League from the beginning. So they completely turned around, as Ruth did, turned around their season from 1925 and coasted almost all the way to the pennant. They faded a little bit at the end. They only beat out Cleveland by 3 games, but the Yankees were pretty dominant for most of the 1926 season in the American League. So, in terms of the book, that's what I began to work with to kind of trace all of those stories and games. Especially the Grover Cleveland Alexander contribution was really important, I thought, to highlight in the book in terms of the two teams. But there were other things about 1926 that intrigued me. One of the things I had not done in the called shot was address or write or research anything about the Negro Leagues. And it struck me that that's, for those of us who have written about the 19 teens and 20s, that if you want to think about all of what was happening in baseball in America, you've got to include something about the Negro Leagues, this kind of parallel universe that existed against the white major leagues. So that probably was what took me the most time to research, because I had the least amount of knowledge going in, and the sources were the hardest to find. But 1926 was a kind of pivotal year for Black baseball. Up until 1920, teams had been sort of loosely organized. They were barnstorming teams, but there wasn't an official league until 1920. And in 1920, Rube Foster, who was a pitcher, a manager, and an owner of a Black baseball team, the Chicago American Giants, and I really felt, as I began to did work on the research, that Rube Foster was really a giant figure in baseball's history in the early 20th century. Although I don't think he's that well known as a player, or even he is in the Hall of Fame, but he's not that well even known among people who study and write about and know about the Negro Leagues. He's sort of overshadowed by Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson, Jackie Robinson, all players who came a little bit later. So, so I wanted to include a section about the Negro Leagues, and 1926 was a pivotal year in that that's a year that Rube Foster dropped out of the picture. He had he was hospitalized with a mental illness, and his team, the Chicago American Giants, wound up going to the Colored World Series of 1926. And the star pitcher in that series was Willie Foster, who was Rube Foster's younger half brother. And so that became a kind of interesting story to follow also, how Rube Foster's, who was such a dominant figure in the history of black baseball up until 1926, kind of passed the torch in one way to his younger brother, who had this spectacular postseason. And the other thing about 1926 in terms of black baseball history is that's the beginning of Satchel Paige's career. That's the year that he turned professional and had his first year as a professional ball player. So I did 2 chapters of the book on black baseball. One was really a kind of a look at Rube Foster and the history of black baseball up till 1926, and then I did a whole chapter on the Colored World Series of 1926, so that I could bring to the attention of fans and historians, the players that were involved in the 1926 Colored World Series. Now, there's one other story that kind of, almost came to dominate the book in certain ways in the second half of the book, and that's this betting scandal or game fixing scandal that involved Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker. Cobb was the player manager for the Tigers in 1926, and Tris Speaker was the player manager still of the Cleveland Indians in 1926. And the scandal itself arose out of a game that was played in 1919, 6 days before the end of the season in 1919, or 6 days before the Black Sox series, and with the White Sox and the Reds. So just in brief form, what the scandal involved is that there was a player on Cobb's team named Dutch Leonard, really good left-handed pitcher. And there are actually 2 Dutch Leonards who played in the major leagues. This is the early Dutch Leonard, not the knuckleballer who pitched later, mostly I think for the Senators. But Dutch Leonard was on the Tigers in 1919. He and Cobb did not really get along. In fact, Cobb said later in an interview that there were only 2 players that he ever played against that he deliberately tried to hurt, and he said Dutch Leonard was one of them. So there was some bad blood to begin with between Dutch Leonard and Cobb, which comes out in 1926. It's not really evident in 1919. The game in question in 1919 was played in Detroit, and it was right at the end of the season. The Cleveland Indians were visiting. They had already clinched second place, and the Tigers were battling for third place. What Dutch Leonard alleged was that before the last game of that series, Tris Speaker gathered himself, one of his teammates, Smokey Joe Wood, and Dutch Leonard and Ty Cobb talked to them under the stands and said, the Indians are going to lose tomorrow, so we might as well bet on the game and make some money on it. Now, the issue as it became more visible in 1926 was exactly what Speaker might have meant by that. Speaker and Cobb and Smokey Joe Wood all claimed that they did not have this meeting with Dutch Leonard, that Dutch Leonard had made it up. The game itself was played. Neither Leonard nor Smokey Joe Wood played in the game. Cobb played as the manager of the Tigers. He had won, and his team was supposed to win. They had bet up to $2,000 a player on this game, so they had the amount of money that they were betting, according to Leonard, was considerable, 10% of their salary, basically. So they were very certain that the Indians were going to lose and the Tigers were going to win. Cobb didn't contribute much to winning. He had 1 hit and 4 at-bats. Speaker, who was the manager of the team that was supposed um, to lose, actually had 3 hits, including a couple of extra base hits. So when you look back at how they performed, it didn't really make much sense that they had done anything to fix the game or to influence the outcome of of the uh, of the game. Now, the game itself is kind of interesting. It was obviously, as I said, at the end of the season. Um, the Indians had nothing to play for. The Tigers did have something to play for, um, but they weren't highly motivated, I would say. The game was 9-5, 14 runs scored, 31 hits in the game, and the game was played in 66 minutes. So you can understand that or certainly deduce that the game didn't mean a whole lot to most of these players. Players later said um, batters usually swung at the first pitch on almost every at bat because, for one thing, the game was in Detroit and Cleveland had to travel back home after this game. It was the last game of the series, and if the game got done in time, they could take the train. But if the game went on too long, they would have to take a boat. And so the Cleveland Indians, especially, they'd already clinched second place. They wanted to get back home that night. They had no incentive to play at all, really. So this 9 inning game was played in 66 minutes. So that's just a little sort of interesting fact about the game itself. So as for the betting on it, the money was given to a guy named Fred West, who was a clubhouse attendant in Detroit, and he tried to bet the money that had been put up by Wood. Again, this is what's alleged by Leonard. Tried to put up the money uh, with bookmakers in Detroit, found that they wouldn't take such a large amount of money on a bet on short notice. So he went to Chicago and was able to produce or to find bookmakers who would take some of the money, make a would allow him to bet some of the money. So some of the money was bet. Um, Nobody other than these 5 individuals told anybody about what had happened, or what the betting had been, um, so that the story itself was kind of submerged for 7 years. And when Dutch Leonard decided to divulge what he knew about it, he produced 2 letters that had been written to him shortly after this game, one by Smokey Joe Wood, um, and one by not Speaker, but Cobb and Smokey Joe Wood had both written to Leonard and addressed the fact that there had been money put aside to bet on this game. Leonard kept those letters, and then in 1926, he was bitter with Cobb. His career basically had been ended by Cobb, who sold his contract to a team in the Pacific Coast League. Blackballed him out of baseball, is what Leonard thought. So Leonard thought that he would go to the newspapers and divulge this scandal that had happened 7 years before, alleging that they had fixed the game. Van Johnson bought the letters from Leonard on the ground with the promise that Leonard would keep quiet about it. He did not inform anybody, Jimmy Van Johnson didn't, that he had collected these letters uh, from Cobb and Smokey Joe Wood, and he had possession of them until September. And then in September, the American League presidents of each of the teams felt that this needed to be addressed by Judge Landis, and so uh, so the whole scandal that Dutch Leonard alleged came to light, and Judge Landis then had to investigate that toward the end of the season. So that becomes a part of the book at the very end of the book. Um, See, I don't want to run over time-wise. Let me look at my clock here. Let me jump ahead to the 1926 World Series, and then maybe we can back up and discuss and answer any questions people might have. But um, So we've got the Cardinals and the Yankees who make it to the World Series. Game one is in Yankee Stadium. Herb Pennock of the Yankees beats Willie Surdell of the Cardinals in a 2-1 game. Very well pitched game. Game two, Rogers Hornsby picks Grover Cleveland Alexander to pitch game two, and Alexander pitches an excellent game. The Cardinals win, ties the series at 1-1, and then the series shifts to St. Louis for games 3, 4, and 5. Game three goes to the Cardinals. It's 4-1 shutout pitched by Jesse Haynes, but the game is delayed. After about the third or fourth inning, there's a rainstorm. Players come off the field to go to their respective dugouts, waiting for the rain to stop. While the players are in the dugout, a policeman comes through each of the dugouts with a ball that he asks players to sign in order to send it to a boy in New Jersey who's sick. The Cardinals players, several Cardinal players sign the ball. The ball goes to the Yankee dugout. Several Yankee players sign the ball. And then it comes to Babe Ruth, and Babe Ruth puts his signature on the ball and writes a message to this boy. His name is Johnny Sylvester. And he says, "I'll hit a home run for you tomorrow." One of the many home runs that Ruth predicted in his career. And sometimes he fulfilled those promises better than others. But anyway, so the game goes on. Cardinals win behind Jesse Haynes. Then in game four, the Yankees finally start scoring some runs, and Ruth hits not one home run for Johnny Sylvester, but 3 home runs, and the Yankees win 10-5 to tie the series. And then game 5 is played also in St. Louis. Again, the Yankees win. This is a 3-2 game that the Yankees win. Again, Herb Pennock and Willie Surdell match up. This is a 10-inning game. That sends the series back to New York, with the Yankees just needing one more win to be the world champions and come from 7th place to 1st place in a world championship. Hornsby for game 6 picks Grover Cleveland Alexander again to pitch in Yankee Stadium. And again, Alexander pitches a fine game. The Cardinals win, and this takes it to a 7th game with the series tied 3-3. So it's the 7th game of the series. It's going to be decided. Jesse Haynes is the starting pitcher for the Cardinals. The Cardinals lead the game. It's a very closely played game. The score is 3-2 going into the 7th inning. The Yankees load the bases, and Tony Lazzeri comes to bat. This is a critical point, of course, in the series. If Lazzeri gets an extra base hit, it pretty much gives the series to the Yankees. Hornsby is worried about Haynes at this point. He comes in from second base to ask Haynes how he's doing, how he's feeling. Haynes said he feels fine, but he's developed a blister on his hand. His pitching hand, is bleeding. And Hornsby asks him, "Can you pitch to Lazzeri?" And he said, "I can't throw the knuckleball, but I can throw fastballs." And Hornsby decides immediately that he does not want Haynes throwing fastballs to Tony Lazzeri, who came in second in the American League and runs batted in that season. So Hornsby decides to take Haynes out of the game, and he has down in the bullpen every pitcher available, except for Surdell probably, who pitched the day before. He has basically every pitcher available, and he signals that he wants Grover Cleveland Alexander to come in and pitch to Lazzeri with the bases loaded, bottom of the 7th inning. This is the most discussed at bat in Lazzeri's career, and probably one of the most discussed half innings in baseball history. Alexander comes in. He tells Hornsby what he's going to do. He said, "I'm going to throw a couple of fastballs, and then I'll throw him a curve, and he'll strike out." And that's exactly what happens. Alexander strikes out Lazzeri, preserves the lead, and it goes as the score is 3-2, Cardinals leading. Going into the 8th inning, Cardinals don't score in the top. Yankees don't score in the bottom of the 8th. Goes to the 9th. Cardinals don't score in the top of the 9th. Goes to the bottom of the 9th. Alexander's still on the mound. He hasn't given up any hits, any base runners. He's got 2 outs, and the batter is Babe Ruth. So here's Ruth, ninth inning in Yankee Stadium in a series where he's already hit 4 home runs. And Alexander works very carefully to him. And in Alexander's career against Ruth, Ruth had never gotten a hit. So he was prudent and working very slowly and deliberately to Ruth. So Ruth walks, and the next hitter is Bob Musil, and on deck is Lou Gehrig. So now we're in the situation where it's Cardinals leading 3-2, bottom of the ninth, tying run on first base, potential winning run at the plate, or perhaps um, um, in Gehrig's, or possibly if Gehrig comes to bat. And on the first pitch to Musil, Ruth takes off and tries to steal second base. The catcher, Bob O'Farrell, throws him out. Hornsby tags Ruth. Ruth gets up, shakes hands with Hornsby, congratulates him, trots off, and the World Series has ended for the first and probably for the only time on a failed stolen base. And of course, there's much commentary about this afterwards. Why did Ruth try to steal? Was it a smart baseball move? Was it just stupid? I mean, what was Ruth thinking? Ruth had an interesting answer to that. Ruth said that he thought Alexander wasn't paying any attention to him. And there was only one stolen base in the World Series of 1926 by the Yankees, and that was Ruth, who stole a base off Alexander in Game 6. So Ruth in Game 7 was thinking, hey, maybe I can make it a second base and put myself in scoring position, because as Ruth explained later, he said the way Alexander was pitching, it was really unlikely we were going to get 2 hits to drive in the tying run, and I needed to get into scoring position. So at least if Musil got a hit, or if Musil was walked and then Gehrig got a hit, that Ruth would be able to score and tie the game. So let me stop there and try to see what people think about this series this year. I mean, the whole thing, whole Cobb scandal, alleged game fixing, was something that wasn't resolved until December by Judge Landis. So the story of the 1926 season really continued in the newspapers, in the media, and in the baseball world all the way into the new year. So let me just stop there and get reactions or questions from everybody.
Tom, Don Wilcox here. First of all, you've sold at least one more book tonight. I'm going to order it as soon as we're finished with the program here this evening. Really fascinating stuff. Did Judge Landis conduct a hearing in order to determine his view of matters, or did he just collect written statements or hearsay from whoever might have interviewed the players? Did he have the players with the most information, which presumably would have been Cobb and Speaker and Dutch Leonard? Did he have them come to where, I don't know where headquarters was, if it was in New York at the time or whatever, but how did he conduct his fact-finding mission?
Yeah, well, his headquarters were in Chicago, and his first inclination was to interview Dutch Leonard, because Leonard was the one who was making the allegations, and so he asked Leonard to come to Chicago to give testimony. Leonard refused to come. He said, "People get knocked off in Chicago, so I'm not going there." And there was a, I can't remember who it was, but there was an assassination in the streets of Chicago in that week that Landis was asking Leonard to come to Chicago. So Landis went to California, where Leonard lived.
Wow.
After he retired from baseball, after he was forcibly retired, basically by Cobb, he had a farm in California and was basically a multimillionaire. He grew figs and grapes and various fruits. He was a very wealthy man. He had a record collection of over 1,000 albums. He had a big house. He had a swimming pool. He was he did quite well for himself, but he would not come to Chicago. So Leonard went to interview him in California. Leonard gave his story, which was that these four men had had decided to bet on the game because they they knew that the Indians were going to lose and the Tigers were going to win. And he, of course, by this time, Landis then had copies of the letters, and the letters are kind of incriminating. I put the full text of the letters, the one from Smokey Joe Wood and the one from Ty Cobb, in the book, so you can judge for yourself. Cobb complains that he said he doesn't like the he didn't like what happened, and he did as he said he didn't get any money down on it. So although Cobb later said he didn't intend to bet, the letter kind of suggests that he did intend to bet, but that his funds were never used to place a bet. Clearly, the funds from Wood and Cobb and Speaker were used because the letter from Smokey Joe Wood to Leonard included a check for the money that Leonard had won by betting.
Wow.
So Landis had a lot of evidence. Landis had a lot of evidence that, first, it was definite that they had bet. I mean, Landis understood that. But at that time, before 1920, before the Black Sox scandal and Judge Landis had, become commissioner, this had happened in 1919, this game. And at that time, players were allowed to bet. It was not considered unethical. Players could bet
Really?
on their own teams or against their own teams. And remember, in this particular situation, Speaker and Wood were betting against their own team. So Landis didn't have, because this was before Landis had kind of laid down the law in 1920, after the Black Sox scandal. Landis didn't really have too much authority to deal with this incident. Um, unless the game had actually been fixed. And there's very little evidence that either Cobb or Speaker, who are the only two players who participated in the game, did anything that affected the outcome of the game. So that's kind of a circuitous answer to your question about how Landis investigated Dutch Leonard. But after Landis came back to Chicago, he then called in Cobb, Speaker, and Smokey Joe Wood, and he had interviewed them in his office with the media present. The interviews were recorded and published in the newspaper the next day.
Wow.
So Landis did everything he could to make it seem like he had done a very thorough investigation. Ultimately, what Landis decided was that while it might have been questionable about them betting, they were betting. There was no evidence that they had fixed the game. And so he had reinstated them basically because the American League, I haven't mentioned this yet, but the American League president had requested in secret meetings with Cobb and Speaker that they resign and retire from the game, which they had done. Landis basically reinstated them by saying that there was nothing that he thought that they had done that would affect their eligibility to continue in Major League Baseball. It's a very convoluted story, and I think I spent 3 chapters trying to explain it and put it in the chronology of the season. But
Another quick question. You said that it was not against league rules for the players to bet on baseball games. I didn't think gambling was legal anywhere in the United States. Was it legal in some states at that time, or was this
I don't
all
know
under
if
the,
it.
you know?
Yeah, I don't know if it was legal in the sense of there being laws against it, but it was well known that players bet
Yeah.
on games. Fans bet with each other. I mean, it wasn't like FanDuel is today. I mean, there wasn't any kind of centralized betting, um, but it was gambling in the early part of the 20th century was very, very common for all sports. I mean, going back into the 1800s, of course, horse racing and boxing. I mean, when you have any event where there's an uncertain outcome, you're going to have people who want to bet on it. And there'd been betting on sporting events long before the 1920s. So
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. I'm curious for just the rest of you, how familiar are you with that Cobb speaker scandal? Is that something that is well known today for all of us who follow baseball? It was news to me. I mean, I've been a baseball fan for over 65 years, but that's the first I had heard of that particular
I
episode.
first heard about it tonight, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
same with
no,
me.
yeah, no, me also.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and there's been some very good scholarship done. There's an article by a guy named Lowell Blasdale, who was a history professor, I think, in Texas, to really analyze what had happened there and try to understand what Landis's reasoning was in terms of dismissing basically any kind of charges against Speaker and Cobb. And I think my own take on it is that Landis didn't have enough evidence to convict them in his mind. I mean, it was different than the Chicago Black Sox scandal, where players actually signed confessions, and it was very clear, who had been involved in fixing the 1919 World Series. And I think Landis must also have taken into account that Speaker and Cobb were icons of the game. They were at the end of their careers, and he did not want in 1926 to bring up any kind of scandal that suggested that gambling in baseball was still going on, gambling and game fixing, I should say.
So I read about the Ty Cobb and the gambling situation, like in other books, they would just bring it up, but I haven't read anything that was so focused on it. So it's interesting because, like, was public sentiment, did they think it was hypocritical? Because Landis was so tough on, like, Buck Weaver. And do you think Landis was maybe a little spooked by what he did to just decimate the White Sox completely? And then, it took Babe Ruth to save baseball after that. So I don't
Right.
know. What do you think?
Yeah, I, I think that Landis wanted to just minimize um, the damage to the game, and that he was not acting so much as a judge, which of course he'd been a federal judge before he became commissioner. He was not acting as so much as a judge as he was as a protector for the game of baseball and for the owners. Um, and I don't know. I think it's a really tricky thing. I think if he had dealt with a few other gambling issues, I'm not going to be able to recall them all, but there was a pitcher named Phil Douglas who he had asserted in a letter to a player on another team during the pennant race that if he got a certain amount of money, he would go fishing for the rest of the season, indicating that he would just take a bribe to stop playing. Um, Landis heard that case and banned him from baseball for his uh, for his career, ended his career. And then there was a case of a couple of players, I think on the Giants, Cozy Dolan, and it was another kind of gambling thing that Landis had to deal with, and he banned them. He banned think it was a coach and a player that he banned who had talked about, they hadn't done anything to fix a game, but they talked about fixing a game. And Landis did ban them. So I think with the Speaker Cobb thing, it was a combination of the danger to baseball, damage to baseball, the status of Cobb and Speaker in the game, um, and the lack of clear evidence that anything had happened that eh, Cobb or Speaker had done anything deliberately to affect the outcome of the game. Because it seemed from their play that which is very unlike the Black Sox, where you have all those players involved and you have pitchers involved, and you could really see. I mean, there were journalists there. I think Hugh Fullerton was one, who during the series thought there was something going on that was not legitimate. I just don't think there was enough evidence there for Landis to do anything. And if he had done something, if he had banned Speaker and Cobb at that point, that would have been a bigger story than saying that Dutch Leonard, who pretty much everybody hated and didn't think was very credible, it would be much better to side with Cobb and Speaker than to side with Dutch Leonard, despite the letters. And I mean, that's for those of you who look at the book, or read the book, you'll see those letters, and it will appear that the letters are much more incriminating than what Landis judged in the end. And I think that both the most recent biography of Cobb does have the full version of those letters, and the most recent biography of Speaker doesn't spend as much time. The author doesn't spend as much time going into that whole alleged scandal. Dutch Leonard is an interesting figure. I mean, he came out of it pretty well financially, and he got back at Speaker and Cobb, who he really had not a vendetta necessarily, but he felt that Cobb had blackballed him out of baseball, put him on waivers. True Speaker, who had been his teammate, didn't pick him up for the Indians, and so Leonard was basically banned from baseball, blackballed out of baseball at age 33 when he was still a winning pitcher. Yeah, I think he had a record of 14-11 in the season when Cobb sold him. So nobody liked Dutch Leonard. But he comes across, if you read about what his life was like outside of baseball, he comes across as a pretty likable guy. And he was a terrific pitcher. He pitched on the Boston Red Sox staff that had Ernie Shore and Smokey Joe Wood and Babe Ruth. And Dutch Leonard still holds the record for the lowest ERA in a full season, 0.96.
Oh my!
I think that was in 1914. So he was a good pitcher and a very difficult person apparently to get along with. So,
His
Thank
wealth
you.
come from,
sure.
did Dutch Leonard's wealth come from playing, or did he invest it, or how did he come across his wealth?
It was invested. He invested in land in California, and acquired land and became a farmer of mostly fruits, as I understand it. One sort of interesting aspect of Dutch Leonard's life, which maybe make you see him in a little better light, is that he had several neighbors who were Japanese, and when the Japanese were interned, was sent to internment camps, Leonard took over their farms and ran their farms while they were in the internment camp. And when those Japanese neighbors came back, he turned the land back over to them along with the profits that they would have earned.
Wow.
Nice.
So maybe there was a little bit of a good side to this very contentious guy.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then another quirky thing is you had Tony Lazzeri facing Alexander. I mean, how many times have two epileptics
right,
each other?
right, right.
Not really notable, but just yeah.
Yeah, and I mean for Lazzeri, I feel sorry for Lazzeri. He said later that he ran a bar after he retired from baseball. He ran a bar in San Francisco, and he said there wasn't a single night that went by when somebody didn't come up to him and ask him about that at bat.
Wow!
He was
So,
such a great
boy,
player, and
yeah,
it's like that's what people remembered him for. It was a really
yeah,
pivotal moment. Yeah.
yeah. And I think he had 8 grand slams in his career. I mean, he was a power hitter, and
Yeah.
um, he had
Clutch
actually come
hitter.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd come up with the bases loaded. I think it was in Game 5, and it flied out to Billy Southworth against the wall in right field. And then he had a second chance with the bases loaded in the 7th inning of Game 7, and Alexander got him on a curveball. So, but yeah, as you say, he was a terrific player, and one of the first Italians in the major leagues. There were only 10 Italian players who played in the major leagues in the 1920s.
Really?
So,
Hmm.
I mean, there was a lot of in the culture as a whole. I mean, there's a lot of animosity and prejudice against Italians. And I think that one of the reasons that the Yankees did sign Lazzari and bring him to New York was the fact that New York City had 1 million Italian immigrants, and that they thought if Lazzari turned out to be a good ball player, and they were bringing him to the major leagues the year after Ruth had such a disastrous year. So they were thinking, maybe Lazzari can help the ball club, but also maybe he can draw some of those Italian Americans to the ballpark. So pretty shrewd.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he was the first big Italian star. I mean,
yeah.
and you wonder, I think he was just an inspiration to immigrants.
Hmm.
My mother's family came from Mexico City in 1930, and they became big Yankees fans, even though they lived much closer to Ebbets Field. But
Huh.
maybe the Yankees won a lot more.
Yeah.
That simple. I wish I could ask them, but they're all gone. But
Yeah.
I just, I've heard so many people, immigrants who became Yankees fans. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the tradition with the Yankees. I mean, Joe DiMaggio comes, just about 10 years after Lazzari, and his brothers, of course, wind up in the major leagues. And then with the Yankees, you've got Phil Rizzuto, and you've got a whole series of Italian Americans who become stars. I think Yogi Berra. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
The Hill.
Yep. Tom, you said that Judge Landis found, I guess, no illegal activity, or in illegal being defined by league rules. Was there any push at all to change the league rules to make it illegal for players to gamble? Because it would seem to me, if they're concerned, if only about public relations,
Right.
they would not want to have players, betting on baseball games. And of course, I've got the Pete Rose history in mind.
Right.
I approached that, but I would have thought that changing the league rules might have been something that would have been suggested by the allegations, even if Judge Landis thought that they were insufficient to ban them based on the current regulations. I would have thought there'd have been a motion to or some kind of movement to change the rules.
Well, I think it's a matter of timing, because Judge Landis did basically set the rules in 1920 after the Black Sox scandal, and said players could not bet on baseball games and couldn't bet on their own team. So that was 1920, but this incident had happened in 1919. So I think he gave himself a little bit of an out by saying this happened before I changed the rules. But the rules, as you say, once Landis set those rules, that's basically what got Pete Rose, because I mean, he was in violation of what Landis had laid down as the rules in 1920.
I did not recall that Landis had established new rules in 1920. Yeah.
Yeah, he was pretty definite about that, because I think he understood, because of the number of gambling issues that had come up in the first 20 years of the 20th century, that if he didn't want to see a replay of the Black Sox scandal, he needed to, first of all, ban all the players who were involved, either by participating or even hearing about the plan to fix the games. So he made it as strict as possible, I think. And then he had these other issues to deal with through the 20s, but he basically established the rules that cleaned up the game, and for the fans, allowed fans to believe that games were played on the level. I think that was probably, when you think about what he was doing to protect the game and to protect the owners, a large part of it was that he knew that fans would not go to the ballpark to see games that they thought might be fixed. It's the same way you wouldn't go to a boxing match if you knew if you knew that somebody was paid off and was going to take a dive. You wouldn't, you wouldn't at a track want to bet on a horse that you knew somebody who had, drugged. So, I mean, that's the fan experience is enhanced by not knowing what's going to happen and thinking that these sporting events are legitimate. So
Tom, you talking about Grover Alexander Cleveland. I just looked him up on Baseball Reference because I was curious how much, if he played after that season, and he played another 4 years, including 2 full years, 2.5 years with the Cardinals. And his first season, 1927, he had a 6.2 WAR. So I mean, he pitched amazingly well at age 41 with all those challenges.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
astonishing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he was 21-10 that year. And,
Yeah.
I think he won 16 games the next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah,
Just
he
amazing.
was remarkable. And, you know, he was a very, very good pitcher, and didn't have an overpowering fastball. I mean, it wasn't like Walter Johnson. He was a very smart, shrewd pitcher, and he had terrific control. I mean, I think if you liken him to a pitcher in our era, it might be somebody like Greg Maddux, who, might not have the tools that one thinks are necessary to win 350 games. But
Hmm.
Tom, how long did Rogers Hornsby manage the Cardinals? And then, it's beyond the scope of your book, but I'm a Cub fan. How long did Rogers Hornsby manage the Cubs? Because I think his career came to an unhappy ending with Chicago also, and it related, I think, as much to personality as anything, did it not, for Rogers Hornsby?
It did. He irritated every manager he played for, and he irritated every owner that he played for. But he was probably the best right-handed batter in baseball, certainly through that era. Up to maybe up to Hank Aaron. I mean, he was a terrific ball player, and a very, very dedicated competitor. I mean, he was a fierce competitor. But as for his managing, as I noted, he took over as manager at age 29 of the Cardinals, third of the way into the 1925 season. So he finished out 1925, and then he managed the entire 1926 season with the Cardinals. In the postseason, he was traded. He was traded to the Giants for Frankie Frisch.
Giants. Okay.
John McGraw, actually, he's one of the few people that got along with Hornsby. They had somewhat similar personalities and both very, very competitive. So, yeah, Hornsby said, he said, they can trade me, wherever they want. He said it sort of hurt that they traded me after I led them to a pennant and a World Series. But he went to the Giants. He was 1 year with the Giants. Then he went to the Boston Braves. He was there for 1 year. And then he went to the Cubs. And of course, he took the Cubs to the World Series in 29, I believe, right? When they lost to the Athletics. And then in 1932, he had them in the pennant race right up until August, when he got fired. And really, he was fired, going back to gambling and betting. He was fired because he had really a betting addiction. He bet on horse races. I mean, it was legal betting, but he wasn't very good at picking winners, and he wound up losing more money than he won as a gambler betting on horse races. And he began in 1932 to borrow money from his team, from his players, in order to bet or to cover bets. And that's what really forced the Cubs management to get rid of him.
He was a player manager with the Cubs also, is that right? And
that's right. Although he had bone spurs and didn't play in very many games in 32. He is, I think, in 28 and 29. 29 and 30, he would have played a lot more games. He didn't play many games in 32. So
thank you.
Yeah. As a Cubs fan, I would recommend my earlier book, The Called Shot, which is really the story of the New York Yankees and Chicago Cubs. And there's a lot of Cubs and Chicago material in that book. That was
so now that you've opened the door, I have a question about that book.
Oh, okay.
Waiting. When I read that book, I grew up in Iowa. Do I remember correctly, because I forget things as I age, but didn't you write about something about the Anamosa Penitentiary in that book?
I sure did.
Okay.
Gosh, that's interesting.
I grew up 25, 30 miles from there, Marion, Cedar Rapids area, and I've actually played softball there, fast pitch softball. When I was 16, they would have the team, they didn't play any road games, obviously, but they would have tournaments there where teams would come in and play. And it just struck my interest when you talked about that.
Yeah. Actually, the Anamosa Penitentiary figures in 3 different books that I've written. The Called Shot, it figures in there as part of the baseball story. But my wife and I wrote 2 true crime books, and
Oh,
the
okay.
individuals who were accused of murder, a woman who killed her husband allegedly with an axe in the middle of the night, and an 11-year-old boy who killed his abusive parents, they wound up in the Anamosa Penitentiary,
Oh, wow.
and that's how I actually got interested in writing The Called Shot, because when I did the research, my wife and I did the research at the penitentiary, I was told about this story of the warden who became friends with a lifer and who bonded with each other over the
That's what
Cubs.
it
They're
was.
both Cubs fans. And the warden told this lifer who had been there for 30 years that if the Cubs made it to the World Series in 1932, he would take the prisoner out of the prison at his own cost, drive him to Chicago, put him up in a hotel, and they would watch games 3 and 4 of the 1932 World Series. So this warden and this prisoner saw Babe Ruth hit the called shot.
That's what it was. I remember being very
Yeah,
intrigued by that because, like I said, when I was 16, we played there. They check you through and they give you this stamp on your hand that's like goes under a black light to get out. And I remember the guy telling me because I was 16, he said, "Try not to sweat too much because if that washes off, you won't be able to get out and leave." And I've carried that with me since then. So
yeah,
yeah, but yeah,
yeah,
it's a big old neat prison. Of course, it's not probably anywhere you want to be now, but back then we regularly would. I mean, I only went a couple times. We regularly would go to play games inside the grounds with the big 40-foot walls and everything,
yeah,
and of course the guards walk around among everybody. But it was interesting because the inmates always cheered for the visiting team because they felt like the prison team. They felt like that was special privileges, and so they never cheered for their home team.
right.
So, but anyway, sorry to get off task, but I just remembered
Yeah,
that from reading that book and I couldn't recall what it
yeah.
was about, the context.
Yeah, that got me interested in prison baseball, and there's a chapter in the book about prison baseball. The Yankees used to go up and play. Uh, I'm trying to think what the prison is just north of New York City.
Sing Sing?
Sing Sing, yeah,
Yeah,
Sing Sing had a baseball team, and
yeah,
the Yankees would go up and play exhibitions against the players at Sing Sing. Um, so yeah, baseball was considered really good for prisoners, that it was considered part of the rehabilitation, you know. And
right.
in Anamosa, Anamosa was kind of a small town
Yeah,
in northeast Iowa, but they had a town team that participated in a town league of towns that were near Anamosa. But the fans or the people who lived in Anamosa considered the prison team also their team, and they were known as the Snappers because the um, this this inmate who the warden had bonded with was known as Snap Hortman,
okay.
and he was the manager of the prison team, which was again one of the reasons that the warden rewarded him by taking him to Chicago to see a couple of World Series games.
So are you working or did you write a book on prison baseball or you're just it's an interest or
I just included it in
okay,
the called shot, and
gotcha.
I wrote an article on prison baseball that's in the Cooperstown Symposium, but it's just an
Okay,
essay. Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
So when in the called shot, did you get into the Billy Jurgis connection with everything? And I'm talking
Yeah,
about crime. He was shot, and then they had to get Mark Koenig, and there was a lot of animosity. And so, do you get
right.
into that? Because there's a lot of debate about, why he called us, why things happened, and there was so much animosity, and a lot of
Right,
people
how
don't
everything
agree.
right, how everything kind of steamrolled, into the World Series. Yeah, well, Billy Jurgis was dating a woman named Violet Popovich. She had dated several other ball players, including Kai Kyler and Leo DeRocher. But she kind of latched on to Billy, and she and Billy were an item for a while. And then he tried to break up with her. He was staying in this is something I can remember. He was staying in room 509 of the Hotel Carlos, and she went to that room July 6th, 1932, with a gun. She fortified herself with some gin first, but she went with a gun and um, she was going to demand that they either get back together or she was going to kill him and kill herself. And she pulled the gun out. He grabbed the gun went off. They were both wounded, superficial wounds, but it knocked him out of the lineup for a little over 2 weeks. Many people have written, and I think I think there's a misconception here that Koenig was brought up from the minors because Billy Jurgis was unavailable. But Jurgis was back playing before Koenig was bought by the Cubs. Koenig actually replaced Hornsby because when Hornsby was fired, they needed another infielder. But then Koenig and Jurgis both played the same position, and Koenig had a really good August and September, really led them in many ways to that pennant. But at the end of the season, when the Cub players voted World Series shares, they only gave Koenig a half share. And Koenig had previously played with the Yankees Murderers Row and Babe Ruth. So Ruth and Koenig had been teammates back in the 20s. So Ruth made a big deal about the fact that the Cubs were cheapskates and were cheating Koenig out of money, and that's supposedly the big dispute between them, and all the trash talking back and forth that led to Ruth in one way. It led to Ruth and the called shot in inning 5, game 3 of the 32 World Series. But yeah.
And
Billy
Hotel
Jurgis,
Carlos still stands. So 38-34 North Sheffield. If you go to a Cubs game,
yeah. Have you
walk a
ever
little north. And
have you ever stepped inside it? It's sort of
I never have.
it's
Yeah.
a kind of a transient hotel now. I had thought,
Yeah. It was for a while. I was wondering. Yeah.
yeah, apparently it's a little dangerous and a little seedy as a place to stay. Because I had the thought at one point that wouldn't it be kind of neat to reserve room 509 and then write about it. But I went into the hotel once, and it just didn't feel real comfortable. And the hotel clerk was behind bulletproof glass, and I thought that's a bad sign. But it is close to Wrigley Field.
Yeah, and that's a high price area. You got to figure that they'll do something with that.
What hotel is it? Hotel Conrad?
Hotel Carlos.
Oh, Carlos.
Carlos.
Okay.
Yeah, Hotel Carlos. Yeah, in Sheffield, and yeah, just probably 3 or 4 blocks from Wrigley Field, isn't it? And
Right.
Very,
Just
very,
north.
very
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
And in 32, there were a number of players, Cubs players, who stayed there, who lived in the hotel. So yeah, that's definitely a part of the called shot story and the whole story of the 1932 season. Violet Popovich is a fascinating young woman who she wound up marrying a boxer and living in California. I spent
It's
probably
crazy.
I probably spent too many hours researching. That's a rabbit hole you go down as a researcher. You want to know what happened to this person or that person, and then you go down and it's a week later, you haven't done anything on your project, but you've learned a whole lot about something that won't fit in your book. So,
Any more questions? Anyone else?
I sent Mary a note to tease her, but she apparently didn't see it.
I gotta see. Yeah, I was just checking the chat. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I didn't want to call you out publicly, but
For some reason. Oh, here I see. Okay. Look.
I thought maybe you wanted to end the meeting that way.
Oh, I feel funny doing it.
Okay, it's all right.
My husband will.
I
think I'm
hadn't
crazy.
met Mary before, so I looked up her bio, and in one of the things I read, it said that she can sing like Louis Armstrong. So
I think I can. I haven't done it for a long time. So,
Okay.
and I always think it's really disturbing for an old white woman to try to sing like Louis Armstrong. But it was just a funny thing I did when I
Yeah,
was younger. And
that's
yeah.
okay. I was just giving you a hard time. Thanks for joining us.
No, it's really a nice group. Yeah.
Yeah.
Barry, are you related to Stuart Shea,
No, I'm not.
who
Yeah.
he's written about the Cubs?
Yeah, he wrote, I mean, that's one of my favorite books about Wrigley Field. And yeah, I met him very briefly at a SABR convention in Chicago. So,
Tom,
so
where do you live?
pardon me?
I'm in
Oh,
Chapel Hill, North Carolina now.
Okay, I wasn't
Um,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, I grew up in the Midwest. Was born in Indiana, grew up in Ohio, went to school at Knox College in Illinois.
Oh,
Um,
sure. There's
and
a
then
prairie fire now, in case you didn't know
yeah,
that.
the Prairie Fire. Yep, yep. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Iowa. So,
Oh, well, I'm from Solon, 9 miles
oh,
from the
okay.
University of Iowa. Yeah,
Oh, so you know about Solon beef days?
absolutely. I lived it. Still live
Yeah.
it sometimes. Yeah. We used to have turtle races, guys. It was like state renowned. Every year they'd have turtle races. So now they have a hay bale toss, and all they have a football player, lineman come and participate in that. But anyway, I wasn't sure, Tom. Because like I said, you had that Midwestern flavor in that book too. With the animals and
Yeah,
stuff. So I wasn't sure where you were from.
yeah, yeah. I'm still a big Iowa Hawkeyes fan. So,
Yep.
yeah.
You're gold in my eyes then.
Yeah, I live down here in North Carolina amongst Tar Heel and Wolfpack fans. So, and
Yeah. Well, I have Illini fans. I think that's about as
yeah,
bad. So
yeah, yeah,
Go orange and blue. What are you talking about, Jeff?
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. So are the
Yeah.
Broncos.
Oh, true, true.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tom, and thanks everyone for joining us. It was
I
fantastic.
bought your book already. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah,
Good,
me
great,
too.
great. I hope you like it. I hope you
Same
like
here.
it.
I feel like
Um,
somebody give us an hour of their time. That's the least we can do, right?
Yep.
Oh,
So,
great,
And
great. I appreciate it. I
you
appreciate
have
it.
one more question. Do you have any projects going on right now?
I don't, and
Okay.
I'm debating whether or not to try another baseball project, or I'm interested in writing fiction. I actually have an MFA in fiction writing, so I may switch from nonfiction back to fiction.
Okay.
Um,
Cool. Well, thank
so,
you.
oh, you're welcome. You're
Thank
welcome.
you
It's
thank
been
you
very
for your
great
much.
for me.
time.
Thanks so
Chad,
much.
Yeah.
And
Chad
Jeff,
and
do you go to
Ryan, thanks for
SABR,
setting it
the
up.
national
Yes, every
SABR?
year. Were you there this year?
Okay, I'll get a couple of drinks in me and then I'll pull out Louis
Okay.
Armstrong.
I'll remind you I'll remind you in Cleveland.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll work, I'll practice.
Yeah. Well, he got very fair warning now. I didn't
I
want to drop
know.
on you. That's why I
No,
sent
I
you.
put myself out there, so
Oh, okay.
I gotta
Thanks.
do it.
See you guys.
Right. Thank
Nice
you,
meeting you
everyone.
all.
Okay,
Take care.
thanks a lot.
Bye.
I enjoyed it. It was great.
Chad and Ryan, thank you for setting it all up as well.
Well, thanks
Yeah.
for joining us. Good to see you,
Yeah,
Don.
thanks, Ryan. As always.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good
See ya.
night.
Okay, great.